Shock. The Suicide Squad on motorcycles. The Russian command throws hundreds of its soldiers into battle every day, simply to be slaughtered. For the sake of impressive numbers, the Kremlin has chosen a new tactic, assaults on motorcycles. Yes, this is not a joke. What is really behind this insane strategy? What are the consequences of it on the front lines? You'll find out right now.
Motorcycle assaults are becoming the main tactic of the Russian army. With these suicide squads, the Russians are trying to wear down the Ukrainian armed forces.
It allows for rapid and efficient maneuvering, helping you to stay alive and well. Because right now, the enemy is using a lot of different weapons, including airstrikes and more.
These rapid breakthroughs are exactly what is becoming the tactic of the Russian army today, to break through, secure a foothold, and then bring in the necessary reserves. But on the other hand, good weather is needed for this. For this, you also need the right location and the appropriate landscape, because it's quite clear that such attacks can only really be effectively carried out on flat, open steppe-like terrain, where there are few obstacles.
We're talking now not just about dozens, but about hundreds of such assault troops.
We recently had an assault. 100 motorcycles. 100 motorcycles. A whole company. There needs to be an advantage in drones. A mortar won't help. Artillery won't help. Infantry small arms will help, and having an advantage in drones so the pilot can catch up to them.
The Russian command has become so inspired by this new opportunity that they are already trying to officially organize frontline operations using motorcycles.
This tactic of motorcycle attacks began to be implemented by General Mordvichev, who operated in the Pokrovsk direction, whom we remember as the Butcher general who stormed Mariupol and Avdiivka, destroyed these settlements, and who has now been appointed commander of the ground forces.
War is a struggle of technologies. There is constant development. Our Russian soldier is unpretentious.
They also want to create training centers for motorcyclists and integrate them into regular military units. And according to experts, motorcycles will be easier to obtain than other equipment.
Obviously, there will be supplies from China, which is also involved in this area. And it's hard to say that an ordinary motorcycle is for military purposes. There's always a caveat that this isn't military equipment, so what complaints could there be? For China, it's obvious that this will still be profitable.
The only remaining question is about the people. Because as usual, people for this so-called brave cause are neither counted nor naturally spared.
Most of these motorcyclists end up dying. They are either killed or wounded. In other words, they haven't been able to break through on a large scale the way they'd like to. It's probably difficult to find, even throughout the Russian Federation, such a corresponding number of motorbikers who are ready, for example, to get on a motorcycle, ride a certain distance, and get into the package.
I was just in shock when I saw a motorcycle explode and the person falls off screaming and like their leg gets blown off or something. Well, I had orders to just keep going. I couldn't stop or do anything, because if I stopped, they'd blow me up too.
I wonder how many hundreds of thousands or even millions of his own soldiers Putin is willing to sacrifice, just so he doesn't have to admit that he lost the war a long time ago.
A full-scale offensive. Putin's army has launched an attack. There's not even a hint of a ceasefire. Summer is starting with a massive bloodbath. Where exactly is the enemy breaking through right now? Where is the Kremlin throwing everything that's left of its army? And what is the goal of this new bloody offensive? Details in this urgent report from the front lines.
If you want peace, prepare for war.
Or a large-scale offensive by the occupiers, disguised as a negotiation process.
Everyone saw those official delegates, the ones they sent to the negotiations in Istanbul. They're just some nobodies, and I don't think anyone should take this seriously. We all want peace, and no one wants peace more than the Ukrainian military. In fact, the enemy's summer offensive has already begun, and I wouldn't count on a ceasefire anytime soon at this point in time.
While in Turkey, the occupiers' diplomats are doing their best to pretend they want to negotiate.
The delegation arrived in Istanbul today on the president's orders to hold direct bilateral talks with Ukraine without any preconditions.
While in Ukraine, on the front lines, the occupying forces have launched active assault operations in several directions at once.
It seems as if the Russians decided to throw all their infantry and motorized infantry reserves onto the battlefield right before the negotiations.
Oh, damn! Prepare yourselves mentally for war throughout the entire summer and at least into September. It will be very intense and at times unexpected. Sorry, but it's already clear that this was planned and they only need the negotiations as a smokescreen. They don't want anything except a well-prepared offensive.
The Russian Federation will not stop, will not look back, will not hesitate no matter the beginning or the possible resumption of the negotiation track in Istanbul. Phrase it however you like, in any way whatsoever. They will continue to pursue the military objectives set before them.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
There is an intensification of assault operations observed on all fronts at once.
They are carrying out their offensive actions.
They have already started their offensive actions. They began on all fronts. And the main direction was precisely the Sumy region. 67,000 troops were concentrated there.
The occupiers have increased pressure in the Pokrovsk direction and on both flanks of the Pokrovsk front.
At the same time, despite the increased activity of the occupying army, experts and military personnel note that the so-called Russian summer offensive came as no surprise, since the creeping advance and pressure from the aggressor have been ongoing for at least the past year.
So once again, the Russians are preparing for an offensive in the summer, preparing their resources and so on. And now there is no offensive. And in winter and in autumn, that's why I don't really believe in any kind of offensive. To be more precise, it has been ongoing since the end of 2023 anyway.
The talk about a planned summer offensive does not correspond to reality. The offensive has not stopped for a single day. Ukraine's territorial losses in April amounted to about 150 square kilometers. Compared to that, these 150 square kilometers, 150 square kilometers were given up to the Russians at the cost of personnel losses. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, that's about 45,000.
Putin's team rejects concrete steps toward a ceasefire, such as a 30-day truce. But the real will of the Kremlin is demonstrated by military equipment, aircraft, bombs, missiles, shaheds, and hundreds of thousands of armed occupiers concentrated along the entire front. But Ukraine is ready.
Berlin is preparing for war. Germany is hitting the Kremlin with a tough ultimatum. Chancellor Merkel has firmly set the course. No compromises with Putin, only strength. A global rearmament is beginning. The German army is preparing for a decisive battle. What is Europe preparing, and what will this mean for Russia? Find out right now.
The Chancellor of Germany has promised to create the strongest army in Europe. In his first speech, Friedrich Merz stated that Germany must take greater responsibility for the security of the continent.
Issues of defense, development, essentially the revival of the sense of a great, strong Germany. This is what Merz, the new chancellor, has taken up as his banner. Germany wants to restore its power. It wants to reclaim its leading position in Europe.
To realize its ambitions, Germany plans to increase defense spending and invest in the modernization of its armed forces. Merz noted that the country is obliged to fulfill its commitments to NATO and its partners.
Now, the situation is fundamentally changing. The European Union, and after all, Germany is the heart of the EU, the driving force of its economic development. So, the European Union is now facing unprecedented challenges, and in a whole range of areas, challenges it has never encountered before, certainly not in such numbers.
However, such ambitions raise questions. How will they affect the balance of power in Europe and relations with neighboring countries?
How will other European countries react to Germany's attempts to truly become autonomous from dependence on the United States, to develop its own European security framework, and to provide for this with its own arms production capabilities? Everyone will only applaud because the risks, for example, the risk of aggression from the Russian Federation, especially in Eastern European countries, are perceived as more than realistic. Such initiatives by Merz will be supported both within the European Union and by countries that see risks of aggression from the Russian Federation, and not only from the Russian Federation.
It is known that Germany currently has 260,000 military personnel, while a fully staffed armed forces should number about 460,000 people.
Well, these are ambitious goals which are now fully supported by the Germans. Merz currently has a very high and exceptionally strong trust rating, and according to recent sociological data I saw, Germans broadly and strongly support Merz and are fully prepared to follow him in their efforts to achieve these goals.
Germany is taking this seriously. The authorities are not limiting themselves to statements. Already in 2025, the defense budget is expected to increase by more than 15%. At the same time, large-scale investments in the army and military infrastructure are being planned.
This will also create opportunities for investment because there is a lot of money in Germany looking for additional, let's say, niches for investment. These are jobs. And this is an entirely new role for Germany. Let me repeat, not just as the economic driver and locomotive of the European Union, but as a country that is not only the heart, but essentially serves as a kind of steel shield for Europe and is ready to take on responsibility.
Strengthening the German army is not only a domestic task, but also an important signal to Russia. In the context of growing tensions in Europe, such steps could change Moscow's calculations and influence its strategy in the region. But will this reduce provocations and actions from the Kremlin?
Is it beneficial for Germany to become strong from the perspective of the Russian Federation? Obviously not, because along with its strength, Germany will take on a leadership role in Europe and make Europe as a whole stronger. Again, this is absolutely and categorically disadvantageous for the Russian Federation. But will there be risks? Will the Russian Federation try to derail Germany's militarization course? Of course, yes.
During his speech, Merz also emphasized Germany's firm support for Ukraine. He also threatened Russia with tough sanctions in the event of further aggressive actions. Strengthening the German army is not only about ensuring its own security, but also an important signal of solidarity with Ukraine and its partners.
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.